Hello, and welcome to Oakville Matters. This is the show where you can connect with the things that matter to you and to Oakville. And if there's ever a topic you want addressed, you just have to email me, mayor@oakville.ca, and we will get it up for you. Today, I'm joined by Councillor Tom Adams, who serves not just on the Oakville Council, but also on the Regional Halton Council. And locally, we know him as the Chief Budget Officer because Mr. Adams used to work for one of the major banks as a risk manager, and he has an MBA. And who else has qualifications like that? That's exactly who you want as your budget officer, and or budget chair, to be more precise. Councillor Adams, thank you for agreeing to carry this burden. What have you got in store for us this year?
Well, thanks very much. Nice to see you virtually again. We've got lots going on this fall around the budget process like we normally do, but this year with COVID, it's going to be extra busy. As you know, we've got extra burdens to carry. We've had a very rough year in 2020, as so many people have, and it goes the same for all the municipalities across Ontario. Before we finish today, we have to talk about the provincial and federal announcements around funding.
So start there. I mean, it sounds like good news, although I noticed that it's detail-free.
Well, details are always in the fine print, and you got to read the details before you get to celebrate fully. But yesterday, it was announced that $4 billion in funding would be allotted to municipalities in Ontario, half of it for transit and half of it for other support measures related to COVID, and supporting municipalities through the revenue trough that everyone has gone through. As you know, and as many people have heard, transit systems have been virtually shut down, or if they haven't been shut down, they've lost massive amounts of revenue in terms of fare revenue, and they've had extra costs associated with running them. And all of our recreation centers have been shut down, just like private gyms, and we've lost all the revenue associated with running those. And so we've got giant gaps in our budgets. And this funding will help to avoid what would otherwise be emergency measures around how you would handle the lost revenue in municipalities.
Depending, it has to be said, on how much Toronto grabs and what's left over for the rest of us.
That's absolutely correct. So the $2 billion in transit funding is likely to be eaten in large part by the TTC in Toronto. They'll get, I suspect, a disproportionate share of the funding. It won't be divvied up on a per capita basis, I suspect. But that being said, I would expect that Oakville should receive some of that funding, and that will help avoid some of the worst things that we've seen in terms of our revenue numbers over the last little while. I think our current numbers in terms of ridership are about 25% of our ridership is still with us, and that means that we've lost huge amounts of ridership and huge amounts of fare revenue that would have normally gone with that. And so as we grow back into a reopening of the economy, we hope to have resurgence of ridership, a resurgence of fare revenue, and that will eventually bring us back to a better normal. And however, in the meantime, we've lost a lot of money that we would otherwise have seen, and we've got a lot of fixed costs that you can't avoid. And so municipalities like Oakville need the funding to be able to continue operating those services. So.
Yeah, in fact, your background of the beautiful community center in your ward, recreation is another area sort of right after transit where we're losing a lot of money.
That's absolutely right. If you look at the numbers that we've got in terms of the impact of the two major areas of Oakville Transit and our recreation and culture services, they have almost equal financial impacts to the organization in terms of the financial losses related to COVID. That beautiful center behind me has had a lot of days of closed doors, and while it's starting to come back in terms of services being offered through the recreation centers, it's still not generating the kind of revenues that we would normally see through memberships and other activities that in a normal year you would have seen. And so this center, like other centers in Oakville and other centers all across Ontario, has been a giant money loser for municipalities, and that means that we don't get to just write it off. ultimately, there's a cost associated with running the utilities, maintaining the building, and all these other things that even if you're not paying any salaries to some recreational staff that might have been there normally, you still have these costs to cover. And so those would that eventually becomes a tax cost. And so in the meantime, while we're waiting for things to reopen and getting our business back to normal, we have those costs to pay.
So there's a mitigation story to be told, not only for this year, but also for your budget for next year. What kind of mitigation measures do you have in mind for us?
Well, we had a bunch of mitigation measures that we were working on with respect to the Recreation and Culture Department already, and that included the expectation that we were going to be opening the new Oakville Trafalgar Community Center and then operating it. When we were planning the opening of that, we also considered the real need for staffing for a new center and whether staffing could be shared more efficiently across our centers. And so while we were intending to bring on this new center, we also considered the ability of our staff to realign themselves in a more efficient way. So one thing we will be doing is continuing with our plan to better streamline the operation of our recreation centers, and that will mitigate some of the costs that you otherwise have seen of bringing on a new center. That being said, over the course of COVID, we've had huge numbers of staff that we did not bring on in terms of summer staff and contract staff. So there was a number of layoffs that occurred as a result of that. And that absolutely did impact staffing levels all across the municipal sector. And here in Oakville, we saw huge numbers of our Parks and Open staff, summer students, for example, who didn't come on until much later. We did bring on summer students starting in mid-June, but that obviously only covers part of the cost that you would otherwise have seen.
So is there, how much room is there in terms of just changing the timing of capital projects to reduce the pressure on your budget? Is that a lot or just a little?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that the budget committee has already done is to choose to not proceed with the 1% capital levy that we have historically had in Oakville for many, many years. In fact, it goes all the way back to 1996 when Oakville began to add an extra 1% to the local tax levy to cover the capital cost of renewal projects and other capital projects that needed to be dealt with in terms of new infrastructure in predominantly in North Oakville, but in other parts of Oakville as well. And so that 1% won't be added this coming year in 2021. That will create a number of projects that we will have to defer or delay. But there's also a huge number of projects that we delayed this year because of COVID, and that set of capital dollars will be available in 2021. And so the number of projects that will proceed next year will be very large because of the layover of projects from 2020.
So it sounds like there's going to be some catch up next year rather than continued putting off.
I think that's a good description. There obviously will be some new projects as well, but there's a lot of catch up. So you'll recall that when we went into the emergency mode, the province shut down anything that they determined as non-essential business. And that at some point included a very large number of municipal projects as well. And so some of those projects we deemed that we were going to wait and not proceed with them until we were more sure about what was going on. And I think that was a sensible choice at the time. There still is a large part of the province that hasn't quite yet gotten into the third stage. And we don't know what will happen in the fall with respect to potential resurgence of the virus, or if the US border gets reopened and we have cases coming north from the US, for example, that kind of thing. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, and I think it's sensible for our community to choose to delay some of these projects to next year where they weren't absolutely necessary projects in terms of maintaining infrastructure that otherwise would have run into serious problems or caused trouble for the municipality or our residents.
Now, we've had staff working on service reviews, basically efficiency hunting for a couple of years now. Is that going to pay off in mitigation and budget room in the 2021 budget, do you think?
There are, the answer is yes, but they are not big enough to, those efficiency reviews tend to bring us every year a very small efficiency dollar value that we can then put back into our budget to cover other costs that are happening. The level of efficiencies found tends to be a little bit less than 1% every year, and so you'll see a couple $1 million in savings kind of thing that you see, but that's not enough to cover the multi-million-dollar impact from lost COVID revenue lost due to COVID, I'll say, as well as the additional expenses related to the new operating model that you have to have, where you have to provide additional safety measures and preventative measures around COVID. And so those impacts are not equal. The efficiency savings are helpful, but they're not enough to cover the very significant impacts of lost revenue for Oakville Transit and lost revenue for recreation and culture. For example, at the moment on the culture side, we're still not planning the reopening of our cultural center in downtown Oakville. The Oakville Center for Performing Arts won't be open for the foreseeable future until sometime in 2021 likely. Things can change, but that's where we are right now. So we have these really major costs, and we're going to have to be looking at methods of handling what will be a very substantial change. This is not a normal budget year. It is the most challenging budget year any member of our council has ever seen, and it is the most challenging budget year I think any of our staff have ever seen. And so staff need to recognize, and our community need to recognize, this isn't the year for new pet projects to be brought forward and put into the budget. This is going to be the year that we are going to have to be really careful about what choices we make and what things we support and don't support.
Well, I hope this is a year when we're glad for the incredible tendency in our town towards continuity and experience. This is not your first rodeo. It's not our staff's first rodeo. We all survived through I guess we can look back and call the 2008, 2009 recession a warm-up for this.
That's a good way of looking at it. And before that, we had previously we've had years where we have had to do things like put off capital projects because of lower revenue from the development industry and that kind of thing. So those are kind of choices that we've done before. They were generally well received in terms of the sensibleness of them. And I think we can manage to do similar things in the upcoming year. It'll be harder, the choices will be bigger, but we've already started to take some of those steps in terms of choosing to delay some of the capital projects that we think we can delay in order to make space for the following year. You know, one thing we ought to talk about when we're talking about our budgets is the overall impact of our property taxes, including the region of Halton and the education components. And I know that there's a slide that we can put up there. And I know we've been talking about our preliminary budgets, and there was a discussion about a potential 7% increase to the town portion of our property taxes. But that's only one component of our overall property tax increase. When you also add the education component and the regional Halton component, the regional Halton does not have the Oakville Transit and recreational components that the local municipality has. And so their budget is not stretched in the same way that the local budgets are. And so we are expecting over at the region to be able to bring something in that's closer to the 2% kind of figure. And at the town, we are working at bringing our number down to a more reasonable figure. And so if you look at where we are right now, if you take our local 7% figure and you add it to the expectations for the education and regional component, the overall number is about 3.7%. But we are looking at these changes to our local budget, and it means that we've got a giant gap that we are trying to work to fill in the order of about $10 million. And that will require us to take a bunch of actions. But if we can find methods of filling that gap, we can bring our overall increase much more in line with inflation, closer to that 2% or 1.7% figure. And we'll be watching inflation over the next year to see where that goes.
So the overall target, or your personal goal, I guess, is to bring in a total tax increase no greater than inflation?
That's been our, yes, that has been the Town of Oakville Council goal for many years. And we've done that exceptionally well for a very, very long time. And I think that our community and our businesses, as well as our residents, need to have that kind of stability in terms of their planning, so that they recognize that there's going to be an ongoing cost associated with property taxes, but A, it's manageable, and B, it's predictable. And so the figure, the 2% figure, which has been Canada's goal for inflation for a very long time, in effect has become our goal for a very long time as well. And so this year, the inflation figure may be a little bit lower, but it's still expected to be closer to that 2%. It's not expected to be, for example, a 0% inflation figure, which in times of crisis, there is always a group of people out there who said, well, we shouldn't pay any taxes this year. It ought to be zero. And from a municipal sector, that's just not a viable choice in terms of being able to maintain the services that people really rely upon, especially,
or even conduct them.
But during a time of crisis, those services are especially important for a great number of people. And so taking away those services that are relied upon by residents and businesses during a time of upheaval, I think would do more damage than good.
So you're kind of famous for the way you go around town during the summer and the fall of the budget preparation and speak to every group, big and small, and take their questions about the budget. Are you going to keep doing that some way during our?
Yes.
I mean, is it post-COVID yet, or this?
We are not post-COVID.
It's a post-emergency kind of thing, because we're being broadcast on Wednesday, which is the day that the provincial declaration of emergency is being dropped. Now, mind you, all the emergency orders have been continued for the indefinite future, so it's kind of like it's not an emergency, but it's still an emergency. But what's your plan around public consultation? Are you just going to be zooming around town?
We're going to be zooming around town. That's right. So I believe that there's going to be a switch over to a virtual or electronic kind of format for a lot more of this material, which we've seen already for things like our council meetings, where we are in fact bringing residents in and delegates in electronically into our virtual meetings. And there's no reason that you couldn't do that in a budget committee kind of review process or an outreach process in terms of answering people's questions.
So you'll be advertising your zooming about town, I guess.
Yes, that'll be something that we'll be looking at a little bit later into the fall. And of course, we'll be watching what happens in terms of the needs for public health advisories in terms of group settings and how else you might want to have those kind of meetings or need to have those meetings depending on the nature of things. And things are still fluid, as you know. There's a lot changing every single day and every single week, and I don't expect that'll change going into the fall. I think that there'll be a continuing need to be adept at changing the way and versatile in terms of the way you do your work. And certainly we've been doing that on council with the electronic meetings that we've been holding over the last several months.
All right. So when you're talking to these groups in the past, have people tended to ask you to break our labor contracts and not pay our employees their contractual increases?
There's a common question, which is how much do you pay people, and how much is pay going up, and can't you just make it zero and stuff like that? And of course, we, as you know, have a number of union groups that represent our employees, and all of them have various different contracts with us that cover different periods of time and have different agreements in terms of wage increases and other benefits. and those continue. And so you, just like in any other business, if it's covered through a union contract, you can't just turn around and change it at willy-nilly. So those percent increases to our salaries and to our benefits are built into our budget process, and we will continue to do that. It's part of maintaining fair wage practices and fair employment for our workers. We want to be able to attract the best and the brightest to work for us, and I think that over time we've benefited by having good long-standing employees who know our community and are able to do good things when they need to do the good things that they do all the time. And
so I'd like to ask you to turn your mind to the unique situation that we are in Oakville compared to cities that our residents might read about, like Toronto or Guelph or Hamilton, where they are what I'm going to call single tier. Everything's in one municipal corporation, whereas in Oakville, some stuff is in the local municipal corporation and some stuff is in the regional or upper tier municipal corporation. And you and I think it's important for people to understand, have an equal say, each of us, on the both of the budgets of the upper tier and the lower tier. We each have one vote, along with the other members of the councils. And so we participate not only in our local one that we're talking about right now, but in the upper one as well. So can you maybe give people more of a sense of how you monitor both pieces at the same time to make sure that we come in at the target?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is one that I bring up in our discussions with residents and groups across the town. That slide that we were talking about earlier that showed the three components, the town, the region, and the education, is a slide that I always show to individuals when I'm having a discussion with them, because the town and the regional component together make up about 80% of property taxes. And we, through that process that you just described, we control both of those. And so the region of Halton component, which has a different basket of goods in it, different services. So for example, police services are covered through the regional budget. We cover our waste management through the regional budget. A lot of the social services are covered through the regional budget. Public health through the regional budget. So all of those things are covered in this other basket. And we have this local town of Oakville basket that covers all these other services, the Oakville Transit, the recreation, and local roads and parks and open space, all these other things that we care about. And we control those two different baskets through two different councils in order to make the choices that we want to be able to make. But we control the budget process by managing both at the same time. And so when we go over to the region and we set guidance for our staff around what target we're going to set for the region, we're doing so recognizing the impact to the overall tax increase. And likewise over the town of Oakville, when we're preparing our budget, we do so understanding what the likely impact is going to be overall and with the region included. And so our budgeting process recognizes the need to manage the entire affair together. And hence you see that slide that we're talking about. That's the golden slide that says, are we making our target or do we need to do extra work? And so that's the process by which we manage the two things together.
Yeah, a good illustration of the differences. I've received an email or two from people who don't understand the two-tier municipal system in Ontario, complaining that it looks like the police is only 11% of Toronto's budget and it's 30% of the Halton budget. And they're annoyed when you then point out to them, well, you see, Toronto has everything in one corporation and we have it in five, basically, 4 local municipal budgets, Burlington, Halton Hills, Milton, and Oakville. That's alphabetically ordered, and the region. When you add everybody's spending up so that you can compare everything in Halton, apples to apples with Toronto, our police is 8% and Toronto's is 11%.
And Rob, you also had the per capita figures for our police costs. And I think that's a really important kind of figure to consider as well in the context of what's happening in the United States around demands to defund the police and how much they actually spend in some US cities on policing.
Well, thank you for reminding me of that. New York, you know, when you translate to Canadian dollars, spends about $1,000 per capita. Toronto spends about $450 per capita. We spend about $280 per capita. And for the last 11 years, ever since I got sent by regional council to be on the police board, we've held the police board to growth plus inflation, which is a radical change from what it was before I went there. It used to grow at double that. And the result has been that we've been able to divert funding to social programming we might not have otherwise been able to do for going on 9-10 years now. And
Right.
I think we've had good results with that.
And the community safety well-being plan that we've put in place with the region has allowed us to focus on some other things like mental health. And one of those issues that comes up frequently in the discussion around how policing should happen and the need to divert some funding to preemptively manage and prevent some of those mental health issues and cases.
Yeah, I recommend, you know, there are other mayors calling me like, how did you do it? And I go, well, and what should we do? And I go, well, you should get yourself a community safety and well-being plan, because then you're planning out where you need the money, and you identify objectively where the needs are, instead of just arbitrarily saying, well, we'll take this away from here and put it over there. You take it from, you put it where it's needed and measure it, and then you follow the outcomes. Well, good luck with your consultation. I look forward to hearing about you zooming around town.
Thank you, Rob.
I hope that if you have questions about what matters to you, that you'll bring it to Oakville Matters by emailing me at mayor@oakville.ca. And hope to see you again next time. Thanks for watching.